Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something really special, I think. We're going deep into chapter 3 of Lisa Marie Presley and Riley Keough's posthumous memoir, From Here to the Great Unknown. This chapter is called The Wall. And honestly, I feel it holds some of the most, well, profound and maybe overlooked insights into Lisa Marie's life. So, our mission, our goal for this deep dive is to really move past the headlines, past the public image that so often defined her. We want to truly understand the core stuff from her own words, let her truth finally come out. It's about getting to the heart of her experience, the undeniable heart, as she laid it out.
Exactly. And that's just it, isn't it? That's the real power of a memoir like this. It lets us get beyond those often, let's face it, superficial stories spun by the media or just public assumptions, and you actually step into someone's lived experience, see it through their eyes. So yeah, in this deep dive, we're not just listing facts about a famous person. We're going to explore the architecture of survival. That's really what it feels like. The intricate ways someone navigates huge grief and these complex ways we protect ourselves. The Wall, this chapter, gives us this incredible glimpse into the unexamined fallout of really early earth-shattering loss on a child. And I think what we'll uncover reveals insights that go way beyond celebrity. They touch on universal human things, pain, resilience, how we adapt. The depth of understanding we'll reach today, I think it might really surprise you.
Okay, before we really jump in, I do need to give a content warning. This discussion, this deep dive, it will touch on some sensitive topics. Things like childhood trauma, deep grief, emotional neglect, and also addiction. We know these subjects can be heavy, and honestly, your well-being is the most important thing. So please, if anything feels like too much, take care of yourself. Feel free to pause, step away for a bit, come back when you feel ready. There's no pressure. And also just know that we will share some really helpful mental health and grief resources at the very end of our conversation today, just in case you feel you need some support after listening. All right, let's start to unpack this. The chapter opens with this really striking image. After Elvis died, Lisa Marie, who was just 9, she literally built a massive wall around her home in Los Angeles. It's kind of hard to picture, isn't it? A child doing that, orchestrating it. But what's even more fascinating is how honest she is about it. She says this physical wall was way more than just bricks and mortar. She calls it, in her own words, a metaphor. The metaphor for the boundaries she needed so badly, for the huge pain she was burying deep inside, and for the person she basically stopped letting anyone really see. She wrote that this wall gave me a false sense of control. And then, this really profound description, she called it both a prison and a fortress. That duality, right? A prison and a fortress. It sounds like a contradiction, but it seems to perfectly capture her internal state, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And understanding the dual nature of the prison and the fortress, it's really fundamental to getting your experience. On one level, yes, it was a literal physical barrier. I mean, just imagine, you're 9 years old. You're suddenly ripped away from the only stable home you've ever known, Memphis, Graceland. And you're thrown into this unbelievable spotlight after this world-shattering loss. The world outside her new LA home was just chaotic, intrusive, relentlessly public, paparazzi everywhere, media frenzy, basically zero personal space. So building a physical wall, that was a very direct, almost like a primal attempt to carve out a safe space, a tangible response to this overwhelming outside world that offered no safety at all. It was like a desperate act by a child to get back some control over her immediate surroundings when everything else felt completely out of her hands. Think of like a child's plea for just a little private sanctuary inside a massive public fishbowl. But then, like you said, there's the metaphorical fortress. And this is where the deeper psychological stuff really comes in. Her own words, it gave me a false sense of control. That's incredibly telling. It really speaks to that illusion, that external barriers can somehow fix internal chaos. Sure, it might have given her a fleeting sense of security from the outside world, maybe, but at the same time, it became a prison. It trapped her inside with her own pain or isolation. That duality is so key. It was meant to protect, but its very existence also limited her freedom, her ability to make real connections, and ultimately her access to healthy emotional processing. She was, in effect, hiding from the world and hiding from herself all at once. Psychologically speaking, this wall was a response to very specific, complex losses. First, obviously, the sudden, unimaginable death of her father. That's huge. Then the total destruction of her childhood security and any sense of privacy. Gone. And maybe most crucially, it's the silencing of her own voice, her own emotional needs. They just weren't being heard or met. So you can see it as this primal defense mechanism. Self-preservation kicks in. The psyche tries to build a rigid boundary when everything outside feels too messy, chaotic, dangerous. It's kind of an unconscious strategy to manage overwhelming feelings like emotional compartmentalization. She was literally walling off her pain, because there was no safe place for it, no consistent, empathetic person helping her process it. And, many survivors of intense grief, not just famous ones, build these kinds of walls. It's not usually about maliciously keeping people out. It's about trying to reclaim some sense of control, trying to stop yourself from completely falling apart. It's like a psychological tourniquet, applied to a soul that's just hemorrhaging. A desperate attempt to hold it together when everything outside is crumbling. She lost so much so fast. This was her way of trying to hold on to something, even if it meant being utterly alone inside that fortress.
That idea of making yourself untouchable, it's just heartbreaking, especially thinking how young she was. Lisa Marie was just 9 years old when Elvis died. You'd think a child in that situation would be given space and warmth and just loads of time to grieve naturally. But that just wasn't her reality, was it? It seems like fame didn't just complicate things. It basically robbed her of that essential private space to even feel her feelings. Instead, it demanded she perform even while she was deep in sorrow. I just can't imagine the pressure, putting on a brave face, looking okay for a public that felt entitled to her grief somehow. What were the actual sort of long-term effects of that, of having to grieve under that constant, intense spotlight?
The effects, as the memoir lays out so starkly, were, well, devastating. And they showed up frighteningly early. The world watched this young girl dealing with unimaginable loss, but very few people, if anyone, saw the raw internal damage. By the time she was just 13, Lisa Marie was already, as she describes it, spiraling. She was sneaking out. She was experimenting with drugs. She was shoplifting. These behaviors, when you look at them with compassion, with understanding, they're such clear signs of huge internal distress, not just typical teenage acting out. These weren't acts of defiance just for kicks. They were desperate cries for help, desperate attempts to self-soothe maybe, to escape this overwhelming internal pain that she just wasn't equipped to handle, and certainly not while being watched by the entire world. Imagine trying to process your dad dying while headlines track your every move, judging every tear or even the lack of tears. And what's even more impactful, I think, and something the memoir really shines a critical light on, is the specific kind of help or healing she received. She ended up in Scientology's teen rehab program. And this is where the story takes a really tragic, formative turn. This program, instead of actually helping her process emotions in a healthy way, it sort of accidentally solidified the very emotional suppression she was already developing instinctively. She was explicitly taught, believe it or not, that feelings were wrong. Just imagine being a grieving kid, grappling with this huge sadness, and being told that your natural human reaction to loss is fundamentally incorrect, something to be ashamed of. Grief, which is so vital for healing, was specifically labeled as weakness. That instilled such a deep shame around sorrow. On top of that, she was taught that silence was safer than honesty. That actively discouraged any impulse she might have had to talk about her pain or seek real connection. And the instruction to rise above her emotions, that was basically a direct order to just bury them, push them down, ignore them, put on an unfeeling mask for the world. So this external healing process, it had this profound, really damaging internal effect. It didn't just reinforce the tendencies she already had to withdraw, it actively helped her build another wall inside herself. This internal wall wasn't physical, obviously. It was built from emotional suppression, enforced isolation, and this deep-seated belief that her real feelings were unacceptable, maybe even dangerous, or a sign of weakness. This early indoctrination into shutting down emotions created this devastating blueprint for how she'd handle her grief in her life from then on. It cemented her isolation instead of fixing it. It just kept the cycle of unaddressed pain going. Because when emotions, especially big ones like grief, get buried, they don't just disappear, do they? They fester, they twist, they find other ways out, often destructive ways. And they keep affecting your life in subtle but really profound ways for years and years.
Wow, that's just an incredibly difficult thing for a child to navigate, being told your most basic feelings are wrong. And as if that wasn't enough, Chapter 3 also gets into some really tough truths about her relationship with her mother, Priscilla. The memoir really doesn't pull any punches here. It shows this complex, often painful dynamic that clearly left some deep scars. Can you unpack that relationship for us a bit more, especially from Lisa Marie's very raw viewpoint in the chapter?
Yeah, this part of the memoir is incredibly revealing, and honestly, it's quite heartbreaking. It gives us this stark look at these foundational emotional wounds that really shaped so much of Lisa Marie's life. She talks about this profound, deeply rooted sense of being unwanted, right from her earliest moments. She quotes herself feeling, "I was a pain in her ass immediately," and then adds, with this kind of chilling acceptance, "I always felt like she didn't want me." I mean, these aren't just passing thoughts. They point to this deep feeling of rejection that was there from the very start, hitting her core sense of self-worth. The book even mentions Priscilla reportedly considering miscarriage and saying she didn't want to gain weight during pregnancy. Details like that, if Lisa Marie picked up on them even subconsciously, would absolutely feed into that powerful sense of unworthiness. It paints this picture of a child feeling more like an inconvenience than a cherished, wanted baby. And this leads to a really fascinating and deeply painful paradox that the memoir highlights. Lisa Marie describes admiring her mother's beauty, watching her do her makeup, observing her routines. There was clearly a fascination there, maybe even a longing for connection, or perhaps looking for a blueprint on how to be in the world. But then, she states very clearly that she never felt emotionally safe in her presence. And that's such a crucial distinction, one that people outside these dynamics often miss. You can admire someone's external qualities, or even just have them physically present, but that doesn't automatically mean emotional security or real connection. Emotional safety for a kid means feeling seen, heard, validated, consistently cared for in a way that puts their emotional well-being first. It means feeling safe enough to show vulnerability, sadness, fear, without worrying about being judged or dismissed or the parent withdrawing. That deep, fundamental sense of safety. Tragically, it seems, it was missing for Lisa Marie in her relationship with her mother. She could observe, but she couldn't really connect vulnerably. The memoir draws this very clear and frankly devastating line that's kind of the core of this section. Priscilla managed the Presley brand, but Lisa needed a mother, and she never really had one. Now, this isn't necessarily judging Priscilla's intentions or diminishing the huge job she had managing this massive legacy. Instead, it's a stark, painful statement about Lisa Marie's unmet basic emotional needs. It really shows the devastating consequences when a parent, for whatever reason, maybe it's public image, maybe overwhelming responsibilities, maybe even their own stuff, prioritizes something else over a child's fundamental need for connection, validation, and unconditional love. When a child's most important figure seems preoccupied with something external, that child is often left to figure out their emotional world all alone, which just reinforces the walls they've already started building. This lack of a consistently nurturing, emotionally present mother figure just compounded the already crushing grief of losing her father. It created this inescapable void in her earliest, most formative years. She needed a soft place to land, Instead, she found a very hard reality.
When you explain it like that, it really does challenge that common public image of Lisa Marie. For so long, she was often just labeled, rebellious or difficult. That was the easy story, the convenient narrative. But what the memoir shows, especially in chapter 3, it completely reframes all those behaviors. It makes you wonder, was it really rebellion, or was it something much, much deeper going on? Can you talk more about how the memoir helps us see her actions differently, as something way more complex than just defiance?
Absolutely. The memoir really pushes us to read between the lines, right? To look past the surface actions and get to the emotional roots underneath. And when you do that, it becomes incredibly clear that her actions, the sneaking out, the drug use, the sort of public acting out, they weren't just youthful rebellion or some inherent difficulty in her personality. Instead, they were really a desperate, often unconscious, cry out for someone to love her enough to break through her walls. Just picture a child isolated by fame, by grief, by this lack of emotional safety, feeling fundamentally unseen and unheard. How else does a child communicate that kind of profound distress, especially if they don't have a safe space to actually talk about their pain? Her acting out was her language of suffering. It was the only way she knew how. It's a pretty fundamental idea in child development, and a deeply empathetic one. A child doesn't act out unless they're desperate for connection. Their behaviors are often the only way they have to express needs that aren't being met. When talking about pain or asking for comfort directly doesn't work, or maybe even feels dangerous because she learned her feelings were unacceptable, acting out becomes this last resort. A last-ditch attempt to get a response, to be noticed, to make anyone step in and offer the very connection and love they're starving for. And it's such a tragic irony, isn't it, that these pleas for connection are so often misunderstood as defiance, which then leads to more punishment, more isolation, instead of the empathetic help they actually need. The world saw a problem child. She was a child with a problem, trapped behind her own defenses. So just to bring it all together, her defiance wasn't really defiance in the way we usually think of it, like conscious, malicious disobedience or just wanting to cause trouble. It was instead grief, unprocessed, unheard, unloved. That's the profound result of unaddressed childhood grief showing up as disruptive behavior. When grief isn't acknowledged, processed, given the safe space to just be, it doesn't vanish. It morphs, it twists, it finds other ways out, often self-destructive ways. For Lisa Marie, it came out as behaviors the world labeled rebellious, but they were really outward signs of immense internal pain, a silent scream for the compassion and understanding she never got. It was her broken heart acting out, searching for any way possible to be seen, to be heard, and ultimately to find some healing.
That's such an important reframing. It really makes you think about how often we judge people, especially public figures, based on these superficial actions without knowing the immense struggles inside. And speaking of public perception, there's this common assumption that Lisa Marie Presley just had everything. I mean, from the outside looking in, right? Fame, money, staff, security, a literal mansion. It looked like the ultimate privileged life where comfort was guaranteed. But the memoir just completely tears that myth apart, doesn't it? How does it show us so clearly and heartbreakingly that wealth and status just don't heal those deep emotional wounds?
Yeah, the memoir is such a powerful reminder that emotional suffering exists on a totally different level than material wealth or public status. It powerfully shows that grief doesn't care how big your house is, and loneliness doesn't disappear because your name is Presley. These are universal truths, right? They apply to everyone, no matter how much money or fame they have. A huge mansion doesn't fill the gaping hole left by losing someone you love deeply. Millions of dollars don't ease the ache of feeling utterly alone. In fact, for someone like Lisa Marie, the very fame and wealth that supposedly gave her everything might have actually made her loneliness worse. Imagine the pressure of having to pretend to be happy, or at least okay, when the whole world expects you to be a certain way just because of your name. Who could she really trust? Every interaction could have hidden motives. Every glance from a staff member might feel like part of a performance. It creates this almost invisible cage, making it nearly impossible to show vulnerability without feeling like you're letting everyone down, or worrying your pain will just become another headline. Her wealth wasn't really a comfort. It was just another barrier, another part of the wall, demanding she keep up a facade of strength, even while she was falling apart inside. And the details from the memoir, they paint such a vivid and just heartbreaking picture of her isolation, even surrounded by supposed luxury and a house full of people. Her closest companion wasn't a sibling or a trusted friend, it was a Snoopy doll. Just think about the emotional weight of that. A cherished toy being the main source of comfort for a child who, on paper, should have been surrounded by loving, supportive people. Her escape wasn't through normal social interaction or friendships with peers. It was a record player. This machine gave her a private sanctuary, a world she could retreat into alone. Her comfort, she says so poignantly, came from music, not people. Now that's not just about loving art. It highlights a profound lack of consistent emotional support from human beings. Music became a substitute for the connection, the emotional mirroring she wasn't getting from her environment. It was safe, predictable, non-judgmental, when the people around her perhaps weren't. It's just a stark example of how material things can't replace emotional intimacy. And maybe one of the most heartbreaking insights is her deep feeling that California was never home for her. This just reinforces that idea that her true sense of belonging was tied up in Graceland. That place symbolized a lost past, a lost father, and a lost fundamental sense of security. Graceland represented a time before the huge rupture of her father's death, a time when her world, however unusual, felt whole and safe. Being suddenly taken away from that symbolic home, from the place filled with her father's memory, only made her feel more displaced, more lost. It shows how much emotional weight a physical place can hold. Its absence left her feeling constantly adrift, no matter how luxurious or guarded her current home was. The shiny exterior of fame and fortune just couldn't touch the internal devastation of her grief and loneliness. In many ways, it probably just amplified it.
That image of the Snoopy doll on the record player. Wow. It's incredibly powerful. It really drives home that deep isolation she must have felt. A loneliness money could never touch. Okay, let's just take a moment here. I want us to step back from the analysis for a second and really try to feel what Lisa Marie described. This is kind of an immersive moment, so I want you, listening, to try and set aside any ideas you might have, forget the headlines, forget the name Presley for a minute, and just imagine being Lisa.
Yeah, maybe close your eyes for a second if that feels right. Picture this. You're 9 years old. Your father, who is your whole world, your everything, the absolute center of your universe, is suddenly completely gone. Just like that. That huge presence, that source of safety and love is ripped away. The air feels different. You're not in your familiar home in Memphis anymore. Instead, you're abruptly moved back to Los Angeles, a place that, as we just talked about, never felt like home. A place that probably made you feel even more lost and scared. And here's the really critical, chilling part. In the middle of all this shock, grief, confusion, and public attention, surrounded by people, staff, the whole machine of fame, nobody really asks if you're okay. Nobody truly sits with you in your pain. Nobody helps you understand the enormous thing that's happened. Nobody gives you a safe space for your huge feelings. You were just left alone with it. In a strange place, expected to act normal. So what do? In that huge vacuum of support, that terrifying lack of comfort, you build a wall. You build it, not because you want to push people away, not out of anger or defiance, but out of this desperate primal need to keep yourself from completely shattering. It's a survival mechanism, a last resort to hold on to some kind of inner structure when your whole world is just imploded and there's no one there to help you put the pieces back together. And then the memoir drops this line that it hits you right in the chest. It reveals this incredible depth of feeling abandoned, a wound that maybe even started before her father died. Lisa Marie says, "I believe in energy in utero. Maybe I already felt her trying to get rid of me before I was even born." Just think about the crushing weight of a statement like that. It's a child's deeply ingrained interpretation of their earliest experiences. This profound feeling of not being wanted, not being chosen, right from the very start of her existence. This pre-existing foundational sense of abandonment, then layered with the crushing, unaddressed grief of losing her dad, and then the emotional neglect and being taught to suppress her feelings. It creates this incredibly complex, vulnerable inner world. It's not just a random thought. It suggests this deep-seated wound of unworthiness that she carried her whole life. So that's not just a rebellious kid acting out, that's a child, a deeply sensitive soul, carrying the combined weight of feeling abandoned, unprocessed grief, and profound confusion, all of it, tragically, alone. And in the full glare of the public eye, her behaviors were the echoes of these unhealed wounds, not acts of malice. They were the desperate, sometimes chaotic pleas of a heart that never found a safe place to process its pain, a safe person to hear its silent screams. It really calls for empathy, doesn't it? For recognizing the huge struggle she faced every single day.
That's a really powerful way to connect with her experience, to strip away the celebrity and just see the deeply wounded child underneath. And it leads us perfectly to Riley Keough, Lisa Marie's daughter. She takes on this incredible, really pivotal role in the memoir. Riley isn't just narrating here, she's acting as this vital bridge, helping us finally understand her mother, not just from the outside or through that public lens, but from a place of deep empathy, insight, and love. How does Riley manage to do that? This remarkable act of generational healing just by putting this memoir together.
Riley's role here is absolutely crucial, and it's deeply, deeply moving. She comes into Lisa Marie's story, not trying to fix it, not trying to present some cleaned up, perfect version of her mom for everyone. Instead, Riley honors it. And what that means is she respects Lisa Marie's truth. Even the painful parts, the uncomfortable bits, the messy stuff. She lets the raw honesty of her mother's experiences come through without judgment, without trying to smooth over the rough edges. Riley allows us, the readers, the listeners, to truly see Lisa Marie not as the media painted her, but as she really was. A woman stuck in survival mode. Brilliant, broken, loving, lost. That multifaceted description is so important. It acknowledges all of her intelligence, her artistry, her ability to love alongside the profound wounds she carried. It's an act of radical empathy, really understanding the context. And this honoring of her mother's story, it's a profound act of compassion, one that really resonates beyond the book itself. Riley essentially gives her mother the compassion the world never did.
Think about it.
The public, the media, often driven by sensationalism, by wanting dramatic stories, they frequently reduce Lisa Marie to these simple caricatures. The troubled kid, the rebellious rock star daughter, the perpetual victim of her family name. They rarely offer the nuance, the understanding, or the sustained empathy that her life, steeped in such unique loss and constant pressure, truly deserved. By presenting her mother's own raw words, and through her own loving and deeply insightful reflections, Riley basically corrects that historical imbalance. She steps into that gap of public misunderstanding and offers this balm of compassion. She lets her mother's vulnerability, her fundamental humanity, finally be seen, respected, and understood on her own terms. This act by Riley, it's more than just writing a book. It's a powerful example of generational healing. When a child can understand, validate, and empathize with their parents' struggles, especially their unaddressed childhood wounds, and the survival strategies they had to use even after that parent is gone, it starts to break these cycles of pain and misunderstanding that can echo through families for generations. Riley isn't just telling a story. She's kind of repatterning the emotional legacy of her family. But bringing Lisa Marie's truth out into the light, she creates this space for understanding and healing that maybe wasn't possible while her mother was alive, or if the story had just stayed hidden in gossip columns. This honesty allows future generations of the family, and honestly, us too, the listeners, to process and understand, instead of just inheriting the same unresolved wounds or repeating the same silences. This memoir, written together by mother and daughter, stands as this lasting legacy. not just of the Presley family, but maybe as a blueprint for how understanding and empathy, even when facing huge pain and public scrutiny, can start to mend old wounds and build deeper, more truthful connections. It's about truth-telling as this powerful transformative act of love and healing.
That's a beautiful way to frame it. Truth-telling as an act of love.
Mm-hmm.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive into The Wall, Chapter 3 of From Here to the Great Unknown, it leaves us with a really provocative final thought, doesn't it? When Lisa Marie Presley built that literal and metaphorical wall around herself and her home, who was she really building it to protect herself from? Most people might guess, the relentless fans, the paparazzi everywhere, maybe even the difficult aspects of her relationship with her mother, Priscilla. But the memoir suggests something much more fundamental, much more heartbreaking, right?
It really does. The deep truth that comes out of Chapter 3 is that she was protecting, more than anyone or anything else, the little girl inside her. The one who didn't feel chosen. The one who never felt truly safe again after August 16, 1977, the day her father died. The wall wasn't primarily about keeping external forces out, although those definitely played a role in why she needed it so badly. At its deepest level, it was an internal fortress, built around her most vulnerable self. The child who had experienced this unimaginable layered loss and this feeling of abandonment right at her core. So this deep dive into Chapter 3 isn't really about rebellion, like the world often saw her life. It is, at its heart, a raw, unflinching story of survival. It's about how a child, thrown into an impossible situation without the tools or the consistent emotional support she desperately needed, built this elaborate emotional and physical fortress just to keep herself from completely shattering. That wall was proof of her enduring will to survive, even if it was painful and isolating. It speaks volumes about the human ability to build defenses when no other protection seems available.
And if you've ever lost someone too soon, if you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever had to pretend you were okay when you absolutely weren't, you will feel this chapter deep in your bones. It touches on that universal human experience of profound pain, of desperate resilience, and that fundamental search for safety and acceptance in a world that can feel just incredibly overwhelming sometimes. If this deep dive did stir anything up for you, please take care of yourself. Here are some resources that might be helpful. There's the SAMHSA helpline, that's SAMHSA. The number is 1-800-662-4357. It's free, confidential, available 24/7 for folks dealing with mental health or substance use issues. There's also the crisis text line. You can text the word HOME to 741-741 from anywhere in the U.S. anytime and connect with a trained crisis counselor. GriefShare, their website is griefshare.org, is a fantastic resource for finding grief support groups, either in person or online. They offer a really compassionate community if you're navigating loss. And NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, at nimeni.org. They offer mental health education, advocacy, and peer support for individuals and families impacted by mental illness. Please remember, you don't have to carry it alone. Your experiences, your feelings, your well-being, you matter too. Thank you so much for joining us, for engaging with us on this deep dive today. If you found value in this discussion, please think about subscribing. Maybe share it with someone else who might appreciate hearing Lisa Marie's story told with this kind of depth and compassion. And leaving us a comment or review really helps us keep doing this work. Our mission is to keep telling the truth, not just about Elvis, not just the headlines, but about Lisa Marie's real, complex, and profound human experience. Next time, we're opening up Chapter 4 of the memoir. It's titled, There's a Bluebird in My Heart. It sounds poetic, haunting, and apparently shows a side of Lisa no one ever really saw. A glimpse into her inner world of art and deep emotion that was often hidden behind those very walls.
Absolutely. And as we keep exploring these memoirs, it's good to remember the enduring nature of legacy. It's not just about what's public knowledge. It's also about the quiet, profound act of breaking silences, of finally letting a person's whole truth come out. And that, really, is what the deep dive is all about, finding those hidden truths within the story.